Something felt off about the deal, but he really needed this money. He waited in the cold British Columbia forest for about 30 minutes, but still, no one was showing up. Then, in the distance, he saw a group of motorcycles riding down the dirt road in a tight formation. This must be them, he thought, as he began pulling duffel bags of product from his trunk. That was the last thing he remembered before waking up in a pool of his own blood. The duffel bags were gone, and there was certainly no money.
So, for this episode, we're going to do a special guest appearance for the voiceover. I want to introduce you guys to Dammit Main. Big shouts out to him. Go check out his YouTube channel. Go check out his Twitch. Anyways, let's jump into it.
Clayton Rausch is an infamous name in the world of organized crime. Born on May 31st, 1975 in Chilliwack, British Columbia, Rausch became one of the most prominent and notorious figures in the pot industry, running the largest smuggling business in North America. Clay Rausch's smuggling operation was not just profitable, he was a trailblazer, coming up with novel ideas that changed the way pot was moved. Clay Rausch's journey into the world of organized crime began in his hometown of Chilliwack. Contrary to what some might expect, Rausch did not grow up in a poverty-stricken home. His family was certainly upper middle class. They ran a scrapyard and recycling business that brought in $1 million per year in profit. So this decision to deal pot was not because he was hungry. He just really loved the stuff and decided to make money from it. From an early age, Rausch exhibited signs of restless, ambitious nature. He was known for his charisma and ability to connect with people, qualities that would later serve him well as a criminal leader. Rausch was a rebellious man, refusing to go into the family business and also refusing to go to university after graduating high school in 1993. With no further education and a refusal to engage in the family business, Rausch's job options were limited. He managed to get by for a while with some sales jobs, but nothing really stuck. In 1994, he was arrested in connection with pot, but he wasn't dealing. He just happened to be visiting the home of a dealer. So while he was arrested, he wasn't charged with anything. Not too long after the incident, he opened a restaurant, probably with the money given to him by his parents. But that one failed really quickly. Then he met James Coulter in 1997. James Coulter was not a pot lord or anything. He was an avid consumer that would go on to become Rausch's best friend and business partner. But it was about that time that Rausch met Coulter that he decided to make a living out of his love for pot. His girlfriend at the time had connections with a number of Asian organized crime figures in Vancouver. So he took advantage of that connection to obtain large amounts of pot, which he then sold to Coulter and his friends. Of all the crime figures that were introduced to him by his girlfriend, the one that he most was taken by was a Vietnamese man that was simply referred to as Vu. Rausch highly respected Vu and even considered him a surrogate father, even though his actual parents were very loving. Eventually, he began selling pot exclusively for Vu, earning about $1,000 per day. However, Rausch did not plan on serving under somebody for the rest of his life. He highly respected Vu and definitely learned a lot from him. But not long after he met Vu, he founded his own gang.
Before we jump back into the video, I just want to say big thank you to Dr. Smoke for supporting this content. If you guys go over to drsmoke.com and use my discount code LMC, you're going to get 15% off your entire order. Again, that's going to be LMC, 15% off at drsmoke.com. They got all different types of products. Anyways, big thank you to the homies over at Dr. Smoke. Without them, none of this would be possible, so I can't thank them enough. Now, let's jump back into the content.
At the time in Vancouver, the crime and pot scenes were dominated by the Hells Angels. The group had a whites-only admissions policy, and they basically monopolized the pot scene in the entire lower mainland region of British Columbia. In May of 1997, the ever-ambitious Rausch, who was just 22 at the time, decided to form his own group with his friend Coulter. Their idea for the group was to be a direct competition with the Hells Angels, making pot dealing in the area more accessible to everyone. So they made their group multicultural and called it the United Nations. Now, the group might have been called the United Nations, but Rausch was still completely obsessed with Asian culture. So members of the gang were expected to tattoo the gang's slogan, honor, loyalty, respect, on their bodies in Chinese characters, wear hoodies that were covered in Asian imagery, learn and practice mixed martial arts, and engage in rituals derived from Shinto Buddhist rituals. He took things many steps further himself, though. He considered himself to be a Buddhist and was completely committed. He traveled to Hong Kong and Vietnam frequently, and while there, he always took time to visit ancient temples and Buddhist monasteries in search of inspiration. Anyway, Rausch's plan for the United Nations was more than just conquering the lower mainland pot scene. He wanted to go international, and he did. The very same year that the gang was founded, they started exporting pot to the United States. This was a really good idea because BC Bud, as bud that comes from British Columbia, was known at the time for being highly sought after in the United States. Rausch, he was a smart businessman. He knew that he wouldn't be able to dominate the pot dealing market if he sold the same stuff everybody had. If BC pot is generally high quality, there's no reason for people to get their stuff specifically from the United Nations. They could literally just buy from any seller from British Columbia. So what did Rausch do? He decided to secure the 1% of the 1% of quality pot. He approached some of the best growers of the stuff in the Kootenays and offered to pay them handsomely if they would grow for him exclusively. He offered to pay them if the goods got seized or cultivation got disrupted by an early frost. So you best believe they took the deal, and at no time at all, Rausch became one of the most successful and wealthiest pot dealers in the whole of British Columbia. That wasn't enough for him though. He eventually started to grow his own stuff, purchasing large expanses of land in Abbotsford to do that. The operation employed lots of people from different walks of life. According to Rausch himself, everyone from college kids to school teachers and even old people were employed by the United Nations to grow pot. He, however, was not at the farms often because, according to him, he was allergic to the stuff. Having established a significant presence in the pot business, Rausch decided to expand his operations, venturing into smuggling blow. However, seeing as flow is not exactly something that is commonly produced in Canada, he engaged with moving the stuff from Mexico to Canada. Nonetheless, his pot smuggling was the principal aspect of his entire operation, and he literally changed the game. Before he got into the business of moving the stuff from Canada to the United States, the maximum load smugglers were moving at the time was about 15 pounds. But Rausch entered the scene and was moving 100 pounds of the stuff at the time. Then he started transporting his goods using helicopters, and things just exploded figuratively. Sure, there were other people in the groups that started using helicopters to transport their goods, but none of them were moving or making as much as Rausch was. Reports say that he was transporting up to 20 tons of pot every year, making a profit of about $120 million. And this was just pot. With that level of success in the pot business, Rausch understandably brought more attention to Vancouver, where the city used to be a dry, quiet city where nothing ever happened. His success turned it into a city that became notorious for violence and pot dealing. Authorities started paying a lot more attention to the city than they used to. Meanwhile, Rausch was living his best life. He was very hands-on with his business, but he also managed to have time to enjoy himself. There was almost always a party or some kind of shenanigan happening in his house. When none of that was happening, he was with his gang at the nightclub or something. He didn't expect to keep a low profile, and one of his neighbors actually mentioned that he called the cops on Rausch a number of times. However, the police never responded to any of the calls, according to the said neighbor. Anyway, Rausch certainly had issues living it up. He actually seemed quite responsible as far as family were concerned. He married his longtime girlfriend in 2001, adopted her daughter from another marriage not long after that, and he had 2 daughters with his wife eventually. What's more, he kind of served as a surrogate father for his gang, coming to the defense of the ladies when they complained about being abused by their boyfriends. Rausch also invested some of his money in some legitimate business ventures. He opened another restaurant, the Millennium Cafe, and this did not fold. He also invested in real estate all over Fraser River Valley. I've mentioned before that Rausch is a smart businessman. He knew that money from pot dealing can be fleeting. So he decided to get into the legal businesses on the side of that to be sure that he'd always be in luxury. He was right to be prepared because eventually things started to unravel. His operations were way too successful not to be noticed big time by the law. He probably knew that they were coming. However, it seems as if he was not prepared for law enforcement to infiltrate his operation using undercover agents and informers to wiretap his phones. So, in a years-long investigation that was codenamed Project Frozen Timber, the authorities were able to collect significant intel on Rausch and the United Nations. They found out things like his plans to recruit more people, his relationship with the Fresh Off the Boat Killers gang, and unwillingness to travel to the United States because he believed that he would be immediately thrown into jail if he went there. Well, it turned out that he was right to be worried. Now, he didn't ever travel to the United States, at least not voluntarily. What happened was that on May 19, 2008, he traveled down to Mexico for a wedding, but didn't know that he wouldn't be returning to his home for a long time. He was denied entry into the country, so he had to travel back to Vancouver. However, American authorities were aware of his request that his flights be diverted to Dallas. Upon landing, Rausch was arrested by U.S. Customs. He was charged with conspiracy to import blow and pot into the United States and was denied bail. Probably trying to get as light a sentence as possible, Rausch told his prosecutors that he couldn't afford an attorney and would need a public defender to represent him. However, the authorities on his case knew enough about him to know that he could more than afford his own legal counsel. So the move did not work at all. In April 2009, Rausch pled guilty to all charges and was sentenced to 30 years in prison on December 15, 2009. But in 2019, his sentence was reduced to 24 years after a successful appeal. Meanwhile, the gang that he founded, the United Nations, is still active. The gang has gone through a number of changes in leadership, but they're still doing what they were formed to do, moving pot and generally constituting a nuisance. In a market where barriers to entry are controlled by gangs and violence, how do you break in and get a piece for yourself? Start your own gang and become just as violent as your competitors. That's exactly what allowed Clayton Rausch's high-end pot business to thrive. Gangs form when a population needs protection from an outside threat. In this case, the other pot dealers in Vancouver were unable to operate freely out of fear of repercussions from the Hells Angels. Rausch's United Nations provided protection from that.